They erased it from the books, silenced it in the media, but not here. Welcome to Tales of Black, the stories you were never supposed to see.
Imagine a thriving, self-sufficient community built, from the ground up by sheer determination, real ingenuity.
Yeah, built against the odds.
Exactly. Now imagine that same community just reduced to ashes, its residents murdered, displaced, and the people responsible never held accountable.
It sounds like something from a history book about, I don't know, a distant war or some fictional tragedy.
Right. But what if I told you this happened not just once, but repeatedly, right here in America? And the real kicker isn't just how it happened, but why almost no one ever faced consequences.
And that's what this deep dive is all about today. We're stepping into a really painful, often deliberately obscured chapter of U.S. history. We'll be exploring the systematic destruction of prosperous Black communities.
Where are we drawing this from?
Our main source is a powerful report. Its title says a lot. A Step Forward, A Mile of Ash, the destruction of Black prosperity and the legacy of impunity in America. But we're also pulling from numerous historical documents, official commission reports, academic studies, a whole range of materials.
Okay, so our mission today is to peel back the layers. We're going to use these really stark case studies, like Greenwood in Tulsa and Rosewood in Florida, to understand not just the shocking scale of the destruction,
Which was immense.
but crucially why impunity, this lack of accountability, became the absolute norm. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding a deep, hidden flaw, maybe like an architectural flaw in American justice.
And hopefully we'll uncover some surprising facts, moments that really make you rethink the history you thought you knew and how it still echoes today.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're talking about the period after Reconstruction. Things are turbulent. Jim Crow laws are rising. It's an incredibly oppressive time.
Deeply oppressive. Yet amidst all that, something genuinely remarkable was happening.
Black communities weren't just, getting by. They weren't just surviving. They were actively building these vibrant, self-sustaining economies.
And what's so illuminating here, I think, is that these weren't just accidental successes. They weren't just lucky pockets. These were deliberate acts of self-determination. You had visionaries, people who understood that creating economic and social sanctuaries was absolutely essential for Black survival, let alone advancement under those conditions.
They were carving out spaces where dignity and prosperity could actually take root.
Exactly. Real acts of creation.
And probably the most famous, the most iconic example of this has to be Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We all know the name Black Wall Street. Can you paint a picture for us? How did that vision even start?
Absolutely. The vision for Greenwood, it traces directly back to one man, O.W. Gurley. He was a wealthy Black Arkansan, already successful.
Okay.
In 1906, Gurley arrives in Oklahoma, which was then Indian Territory on the cusp of statehood. With incredible foresight, he purchases 40 acres of land.
Just 40 acres.
40 acres. But his plan wasn't just land speculation. It was community building. He made a conscious, deliberate decision to sell lots exclusively to other Black settlers.
Wow, so right from the start, it was intentional.
Completely intentional. Purposeful community building. And almost immediately, this transformed Greenwood into what people quickly recognized as a mecca for Black entrepreneurs. It became this beacon of hope, of opportunity.
And the economic ecosystem that grew there. By 1921, it's just astonishing. It wasn't just a few shops.
Not at all. We're talking about a vibrant, fully self-contained economy. The sheer depth of it is almost hard to believe for that time. You had 108 Black-owned businesses documented.
108.
And think about the variety. 41 grocery and meat markets, 30 restaurants, 5 hotels, all catering to the community, run by the community.
So people could get pretty much everything they needed right there.
Exactly. And beyond that, it fostered this really robust Black middle class. It was home to 33 Black professionals. Think about that. 15 doctors, 3 lawyers, dentists, pharmacists, teachers, all serving and reinvesting right there in Greenwood. It was a true model of economic self-sufficiency.
That's incredible. It wasn't just businesses then, it was the whole fabric of a town.
Precisely. That self-sufficiency, it extended to the community infrastructure itself. Greenwood boasted its own comprehensive setup, mirroring what you'd find in any thriving town, white or Black.
Like schools.
Yes, its own schools, most notably the highly regarded Booker T. Washington High School. Numerous churches, which were, vital hubs, both spiritual and social. A fully functional hospital, a public library, even 2 thriving newspapers, the the Black Dispatch and the Tulsa Star.
Two newspapers.
Two newspapers. So this wasn't just a collection of buildings.
Huh.
It was a complete, functioning society providing everything residents needed: education, healthcare, news, spiritual guidance, all within their own community, by their own people.
And a key factor in its economic power, you mentioned this earlier, was the black dollar, segregation, which was obviously incredibly oppressive.
Horrifically so.
It inadvertently created this unique dynamic, a captive market, they called it.
That's the term used, yes. Residents were, in essence, often compelled to buy black out of necessity. They couldn't always shop at white-owned places due to discrimination, or they simply chose not to.
So they directed their spending inward.
Exactly. And this created an incredibly powerful economic multiplier effect. Reports from the time suggest that a single dollar could circulate within the Greenwood community 12 or 13 times before it ever left.
12 or 13 times. That's amazing.
It generated immense internal wealth and stability. It really fueled this entrepreneurial spirit. It's no surprise that Booker T. Washington himself, after touring the area, famously gave it that moniker we still use today, Black Wall Street.
You can really see the success in the stories of the entrepreneurs there.
Oh, absolutely. These figures who dared to dream and build Greenwood, people like J.B. Stratford. He wasn't content building just any hotel. He built what was widely considered the finest black-owned hotel in the entire region, luxurious, attracting visitors from all over.
A destination in itself.
Truly. And then there was Simon Barry, another visionary. He didn't stop at one business. He developed a successful bus line, crucial for transportation in and around Greenwood. And get this, he even pioneered an airplane rental service.
Airplane rental in the early 1920s.
Incredible foresight, right? Shows that entrepreneurial spirit. And you had families like the Williams family, owners of the iconic Dreamland Theater. They added not just economic value, but crucial cultural and social spaces for entertainment, for community gathering.
These weren't just business owners, they were community pillars.
Absolutely. Embodying that self-determination, that aspiration that defined Greenwood. Their stories really illustrate the depth of the success there. Estimated 5-minute mark.
If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Tales of Black. It's just incredible to hear about that level of dynamism. Now, let's shift focus a bit to Rosewood, Florida. It offers a different story, maybe quieter, but no less significant in terms of prosperity.
That's right. Rosewood, down in Levy County, Florida, it was described quite aptly as a quiet, primarily black, self-sufficient stop, much smaller population, around 200 people.
Some more rural, close-knit.
Very close-knit, intergenerational. But like Greenwood, it reflected a strong sense of self-sufficiency. They had 3 churches, the heart of social and spiritual life, their own school for the kids, a large Masonic building used as a community center for meetings, gatherings.
And they even had a baseball team.
They did. The Rosewood Stars. It really paints this picture of a tight-knit, thriving rural community, kind of insulated by its success and its strong community bonds.
And a key indicator of their wealth, their stability in Rosewood, was the land ownership, right?
Yes, astonishingly high rates of land and home ownership. And we're not talking small plots. Families often owned significant tracts of land, up to 300 acres each in some cases.
300 acres. What did they do with the land?
It was a source of income, primarily through timber and turpentine, which were big industries there. But it was also a foundation for generational wealth. And the homes themselves reflected this. Many families lived in lovely 2-story painted homes, not shacks.
Right, symbols of real middle-class life.
Exactly. Homes furnished with pianos, organs, and other symbols of middle-class prosperity, as the reports mention. Survivors, when they reflected back, often remembered it fondly as a truly happy place. One quote sticks out: "Roses were everywhere you went."
Which just makes what happened later even more tragic.
Unspeakably so.
Yeah.
The economic foundation was solid, often built by influential families who'd been there for generations, like the Carriers and the Goynes.
They were landowners.
Significant landowners, yes, and also successful business leaders, especially in those turpentine and logging industries. Their success really underscored the deep economic roots and stability that defined Rosewood. It was a stark contrast to the poverty so often imposed on black communities elsewhere during that era.
So Greenwood, Rosewood, these weren't just isolated success stories then. They were part of a much larger national phenomenon of black economic growth, black community building.
Absolutely. Happening across the country, often in direct defiance of Jim Crow and the prevailing racial order.
But as we move from this really remarkable picture of prosperity, the grim reality of what followed forces us to look at how these communities, built with such resilience, could unravel so quickly. What was the spark?
Right. We painted this picture of incredible ingenuity, economic strength. But history shows, tragically, that this very success often became the catalyst for destruction.
Which leads us right to that core argument in the report, that prosperity for these communities wasn't a shield, it was actually a provocation.
A profound provocation. And it exposed, as you said earlier, that critical flaw in the American system. To understand why, you have to look at the nature of this prosperity. It wasn't just individuals getting rich.
It was communal.
Communal self-sufficiency, which meant less reliance on white-owned businesses, white services. This directly challenged the established economic hierarchy, which often depended on controlling black labor and spending.
And it challenged the ideology, too, right?
Yeah. Fundamentally, it was a visible, undeniable rejection of the core ideas of white supremacy, the ideas of black inferiority, incapacity for self-governance, inability to progress economically without white control.
So when communities like Greenwood and Rosewood demonstrated they could self-govern, generate wealth, build institutions independently,
It wasn't just offensive to that ideology. It was perceived as an existential threat, a direct challenge to power structures built on racial hierarchy. It was seen as overstepping.
and that kind of overstepping, the system couldn't tolerate it.
Precisely. It often led to a violent reaction, a forced readjustment to restore that hierarchy.
And this wasn't just a theory, it played out again and again across the country. You mentioned Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898.
A crucial example. Wilmington was a thriving port city. Significantly, it had a black majority population and remarkably for the time, a functioning multiracial government. It boasted a substantial, influential black middle class. Black residents owned a huge chunk of the city's businesses, 10 out of 11 restaurants, most barbershops, significant economic and political power.
And the reaction?
A violent white supremacist coup d'etat, the only successful one in American history. They overthrew the elected government, murdered black citizens, and violently displaced thousands, destroying that black prosperity and political agency.
Just unbelievable. And East St. Louis, Illinois, 1917.
A similar dynamic, different context. East St. Louis became a magnet for black migrants during the Great Migration, people seeking industrial jobs. This led to a rapidly growing black community.
Seen as an economic threat by white workers.
Exactly. Especially during a time of intense labor competition and racial tension. The result was one of the deadliest race massacres in U.S. history. Widespread arson, murder, brutal attacks driving black residents out.
Even in smaller places like Slocum, Texas, 1910.
Same pattern. Slocum was a prosperous community of black farmers and business owners. You had figures like Jack Hawley, who exemplified the success, owned a farm, a dairy, a grist mill, a general store.
Doing well for himself and the community.
Absolutely. A testament to hard work, entrepreneurial spirit. But this prosperity was met with a brutal attack by a white mob. Multiple deaths. The entire community scattered, homes and livelihoods destroyed.
And Atlanta, Georgia, 1906.
Again, you see a rapidly growing black middle class. Success in business, particularly along Auburn Avenue, which was becoming a vibrant hub, and increasing black political participation. This ignited significant white resentment, anger.
Fueled by the press.
Often fueled by sensationalist newspaper headlines and deep-seated racial animosity, leading to another brutal race massacre. Estimated 10-minute mark.
If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Tales of Black.
So the paradox is just stark. It's undeniable. The economic success of these communities far from protecting them.
Like Booker T. Washington might have hoped.
Right. It was repeatedly the primary catalyst for their destruction. The evidence is chillingly consistent across these cases. The Tulsa Commission report explicitly cited increasing jealousy over the success of the Black Wall Street as a cause.
And in Atlanta.
Similar findings. White anger surged in reaction to African-American progress in a growing black middle class. The violence wasn't random. It wasn't just a riot in the sense of chaotic two-sided fighting.
It was targeted.
Deliberately targeted economic assets, businesses, homes, the very infrastructure of wealth and community life. This was that overstepping we talked about, met with a violent readjustment to put black people back in their perceived place, to restore the racial hierarchy.
So how did this readjustment, this systematic destruction, usually kick off? The sources point to a chillingly familiar pattern, often starting with a specific insidious pretext.
Exactly. It rarely just erupted out of nowhere. There was almost always a spark.
Okay, let's zoom in on the anatomy of these massacres now. Let's start with Greenwood, Tulsa. It's so critical to understand the trigger, how things escalated so catastrophically.
That really is the central agonizing question the report confronts. And the pattern is, as you say, depressingly consistent. It often began with an insidious pretext, something designed to inflame racial tensions that were already simmering.
So what was the spark in Tulsa?
The incident that ignited the firestorm happened in the Drexel Building elevator on May 30th, 1921. It involved Dick Rowland, a young black shoe shiner, and Sarah Page, a white elevator operator.
What happened in the elevator?
The precise details are still somewhat murky, due to conflicting accounts and time. But numerous contemporary documents, later investigations, they all strongly suggest it was very likely an accidental encounter.
An accident, like he tripped.
Possibly. Maybe Rowland stumbled, maybe his foot brushed against Page. Something minor, something that normally would have been dismissed entirely.
But it wasn't dismissed.
No. Because then the white-owned media got involved. And their role wasn't just reporting, it was incendiary. Papers like the Tulsa Tribune acted as direct agents of chaos. They published these sensational, completely baseless headlines. Things like, Negro arrested for attacking girl in elevator. And even worse, inflammatory editorials that explicitly called for Rowland's lynching.
They called for a lynching in the paper.
Explicitly. This wasn't subtle. It was a deliberate, calculated act to mobilize white sentiment, effectively rallying mobs to gather at the courthouse where Rowland was being held.
So the media basically lit the fuse.
They poured gasoline on it.
Yeah.
The escalation from there was swift, terrifying. Events began that evening with Rowland's arrest. Almost immediately, that agitated white mob gathered at the courthouse, openly demanding he be handed over for lynching.
Then what happened?
A fateful turn. A group of armed black men, many of them World War I veterans.
Men who had served their country.
Exactly. They came to the courthouse determined to prevent another lynching, to protect one of their own. Their presence, their act of community self-defense, was immediately twisted by the authorities and the mob.
How was it twisted?
It was deemed an uprising or an insurrection. Following an initial tense shootout right there at the courthouse, the black defenders, realizing they were vastly outnumbered, strategically retreated back to the Greenwood district.
But the mob followed.
Swiftly. This retreat was followed by a full-scale invasion of Greenwood itself by an enormous white mob. Estimates range up to 10,000 people.
10,000.
And what's truly chilling, and speaks volumes about official complicity, is that many of these rioters were actually deputized by city officials. They were given badges, given weapons.
The city armed the mob.
Effectively, yes, blurring that line completely between state authority and mob violence.
So what happened next wasn't just chaos, it was organized.
It became shockingly organized and methodical. In the early hours of June 1st, 1921, there was apparently an ominous whistle blast, like a signal. And what followed was the systematic looting, burning, and utter destruction of 35 to 40 square blocks of Greenwood.
Just wiped off the map.
Methodically. Witness accounts describe absolute horror families trapped, hiding under beds as their homes were deliberately set on fire, trying to escape the flames and the gunfire raging outside. It was targeted annihilation.
And wasn't there something about airplanes?
Yes. And this is a particularly horrific detail. There are numerous credible reports, backed by eyewitness testimony and some historical records, indicating the use of private airplanes.
What were they doing?
Dropping incendiary devices, turpentine balls, dynamite onto rooftops to spread the fires faster, and possibly even firing rifles down onto fleeing residents.
Bombing their own city.
It makes the Tulsa Massacre one of the first documented instances, maybe the first, of an aerial bombing of an American community by its own citizens. A terrifying precursor to modern warfare tactics turned inward. Estimated 15-minute mark.
If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Tales of Black. The human cost, the economic toll in Tulsa. It's just staggering to comprehend.
Absolutely devastating. And it left these deep, deep lasting wounds. The human losses were catastrophic. Official figures were suppressed for decades, but reliable estimates now range from 100 to 300 people killed.
Hundreds dead.
And over 800 injured. The immediate aftermath left nearly 10,000 people homeless overnight, their lives, their community shattered in hours.
And the property.
Yeah.
Black Wall Street itself.
Gone. More than 12,256 homes were completely destroyed. Businesses, churches, schools, the hospital, the entire physical fabric of that thriving community just obliterated.
What was the estimated damage financially?
Property damage was estimated at over $2 million at that time. Now, if you adjust that for inflation, you're looking at nearly $40 million in 2024 dollars.
$40 million.
Think about that. It represents an absolutely catastrophic generational loss of wealth. Decades of hard-earned prosperity, innovation, community building eradicated in a single brutal event.
The story of Tulsa is just horrifying. A stark illustration of how quickly these communities could be erased. But what's truly disturbing is that this wasn't some isolated, unique blueprint for violence. Rosewood, just 2 years later, it shows a deeply disturbing, almost identical pattern.
It really does. The events in Rosewood, Florida, beginning just 2 years after Tulsa, reveal this depressingly familiar pattern, another example of a prosperous Black community being systematically annihilated.
And the same dynamics were at play.
What's really telling is how the same underlying drivers, the resentment of Black success, and the same insidious pretext manifested themselves again, just in a different location. It demonstrates the systematic nature of this racial violence.
So what was the spark in Rosewood?
Again, it started with an accusation by a white woman, Fannie Taylor, on January 1st, 1923. She claimed she'd been assaulted by a Black man.
But was it true?
Subsequent investigations, particularly that thorough 1993 state report and consistent local accounts from descendants, they strongly suggest she was actually covering up a beating she'd received from her white lover.
So another false accusation used to ignite racial hatred.
Exactly, that familiar pattern. And just like in Tulsa, a white mob quickly formed. They seized on this accusation to hunt for a suspect, fixating on an escaped prisoner named Jesse Hunter, despite absolutely no credible evidence linking him to Fannie Taylor.
Was the Klan involved?
Yes. The mob was further bolstered, emboldened, by Ku Klux Klan members who were already in the area. They'd just finished a rally nearby, adding this organized, terrifying element right from the start.
How did the violence begin?
Swiftly and brutally. The mob's reign of terror started with abducting and torturing a Rosewood resident named Aaron Carrier. Then they lynched a blacksmith, Sam Carter, falsely accusing him of helping the fictional suspect.
Just horrific. And then it escalated further.
It did. On January 4th, the situation exploded into an armed confrontation at the Carrier family home. Sylvester Carrier and his family showed incredible courage, defending their home against the encroaching white mob.
There was a shootout.
A desperate shootout, yes. It tragically resulted in the deaths of Sylvester himself, his elderly mother, Sarah Carrier, and 2 of the white attackers. But this act of self-defense, born of desperation.
It just enraged the mob more.
Exactly. And transformed their anger into this thirst for complete eradication. They retreated, gathered reinforcements, and returned on January 5th. Now their numbers were overwhelming, somewhere between 200 and 300 armed white men.
And they came back for revenge.
They came back to destroy. What they did next was just systematic obliteration. They burned the town to the ground, every single home, every church, every business, ensuring nothing remained standing.
What happened to the residents?
Survivors, mostly women and children, fled for their lives into the dangerous swamps surrounding Rosewood. It's a miracle any survived.
How did they get out?
Their survival was largely thanks to the incredible compassion and courage of a few individuals. A sympathetic white store owner, John Wright, risked his own safety to hide many people. And brave railroad employees managed to evacuate others by train, spiriting them away from the inferno under the cover of darkness.
The devastation was total. What was the official death toll versus reality?
The official story at the time massively downplayed it. Reports listed only 6 Black residents and 2 white attackers killed. But eyewitness accounts from survivors, later investigations, they all suggest a far, far higher number, possibly ranging from 27 up to maybe even 150 Black residents murdered.
So the town was gone, people killed or displaced forever.
Utterly destroyed, wiped off the map, residents permanently displaced, never able to return or rebuild. And this brings us to that really important point about language, the distinction between calling these events riots versus massacres.
Right. Why is that distinction so important?
Because the persistent, deliberate use of the term race riot in contemporary accounts, and even in historical documents for a long time after, was a calculated rhetorical strategy.
How so? What did riot imply?
It created this false equivalence of responsibility. It suggested a two-sided conflict, like both sides were equally aggressive, equally to blame, when the reality was a deliberate, one-sided slaughter and annihilation.
And it had practical consequences too.
Absolutely. Financially, by labeling it a riot, insurance companies could legally deny claims from Black property owners. They had clauses excluding damage from riots or civil commotion. So no funds to rebuild.
Wow. So the term itself prevented recovery.
In many cases, yes. And it served a crucial legal and social purpose, too. It implied Black residents were equally, if not primarily, responsible for the violence. You see this reflected tragically in the 1921 Tulsa grand jury's finding. They actually blamed the Black mobs for the destruction of their own community.
Unbelievable. So calling it a massacre is more than just semantics.
It's a vital historical correction. It accurately reflects the immense power imbalance, the unequivocally one-sided nature of the destruction, and the clear, undeniable intent to annihilate an entire community. It reclaims the truth of what happened. Estimated 20-minute mark.
If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Tales of Black. And this chilling pattern, as you've laid out, it wasn't unique to Tulsa and Rosewood. We see it again and again.
Tragically consistent. If you look at that comparative timeline, Wilmington, 1898, Atlanta, 1906, Slocum, 1910, East St. Louis, 1917, the blueprint repeats.
Black economic success as a catalyst.
Yes. Then false accusations, often sexual in nature, used as a pretext.
Followed by systematic violence.
Systematic violence, often with clear government complicity, either through active participation or deliberate inaction. The pattern of destruction was replicated across the country.
So with this pervasive pattern, this horrific disruption, this systematic annihilation, who was held accountable?
That's the devastating core of it all. The report reveals a truly chilling and frankly infuriating answer. Almost no one. Virtually complete impunity.
Which brings us to that central, agonizing question of this whole deep dive. Why? Why did practically no one face consequences for these widespread atrocities?
And the short, tragic answer, detailed meticulously in the sources, is that this wasn't an accident. It wasn't an oversight or just a failure of individual justice in a few places.
It was systemic.
It was a direct, predictable outcome of a society and its fundamental institutions, from the local police, the county courts, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, being intentionally engineered and deeply embedded with the purpose of maintaining white supremacy.
Impunity wasn't a bug, it was a feature.
Precisely. That lack of accountability was an inherent result of a legal and social order built squarely on that foundation. It was baked into the system.
Let's talk about what the sources call the betrayal of the badge. The role of law enforcement itself.
Yes, the active, undeniable role of law enforcement and government agencies in directly facilitating the violence, rather than preventing it or protecting citizens, is truly shocking when you look at the details.
Like in Tulsa, where city officials actually deputized the mob.
Exactly. They didn't just stand by. They actively deputized and armed members of the white mob, effectively turning vigilantes into extensions of state power. And beyond that, both local police and National Guard units were involved in mass arrests of black residents.
Arresting the victims.
Arresting the victims, confiscating their weapons, disarming them, while simultaneously allowing the white mob to remain fully armed and continue their rampage. It's impossible to see the state as neutral there.
And in Rosewood, you mentioned the sheriff didn't call for help.
Right. The sheriff, despite clear escalating violence, failed to request the National Guard until it was far too late, essentially leaving the community completely undefended. And even worse, a local deputy was reportedly within earshot of Sam Carter's brutal lynching, but did absolutely nothing to intervene.
Just let it happen.
Which sent a clear signal. Black lives were not worth protecting under the law.
And East St. Louis, did law enforcement play a role there too?
A chillingly similar role. During that massacre, National Guard soldiers were reportedly ordered not to shoot white rioters. And even more disturbingly, some accounts suggest that some Guard members actually joined the mob, actively participating in the violence against black residents.
These soldiers joining the rioters.
These examples starkly illustrate that the state, through its authorized agents, was often not a neutral arbiter at all. It was an active participant, or at the very least, a deeply complicit enabler, using its power and authority to facilitate and allow the destruction of black communities.
And then you have the legal system itself, the Jim Crow courts, justice denied by design.
Absolutely. Consider the systematic disenfranchisement first. After Reconstruction ended, Southern states implemented a whole battery of discriminatory laws, poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, all designed to strip black men of their voting rights.
Taking away their political power.
Completely. Without the vote, black communities were rendered politically powerless. They couldn't elect officials who would represent their interests. They couldn't hold law enforcement accountable through the ballot box. Their voices were effectively silenced in the halls of power.
And this extended into the courtroom.
Directly into the jury box. The deliberate, systematic exclusion of black citizens from serving on juries was fundamental to ensuring impunity.
How?
It meant that white perpetrators of racial violence would be judged exclusively by a jury of their white peers, who very often shared the same racial biases, the same white supremacist views. Conviction was almost impossible under those circumstances.
The whole system was stacked against them.
From top to bottom, the police officers making arrests, the prosecutors deciding whether to bring charges, the judges presiding over the trials. These positions were overwhelmingly held by former Confederate soldiers or staunch white supremacists. A fair trial for a black victim, or any real chance of conviction for a white perpetrator. Virtually impossible. The system was rigged.
And the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, actually helped dismantle protections.
Critically and devastatingly so. They played a key role in stripping away federal protections that black citizens had gained during Reconstruction. Take the 1883 ruling that struck down the Civil Rights Act of 1875.
What did that act do?
It was groundbreaking. It prohibited discrimination in public accommodations, hotels, trains, theaters. By striking it down, the Supreme Court essentially said the federal government couldn't enforce civil rights against private individuals or businesses. This left black citizens incredibly vulnerable to legalized segregation and discrimination everywhere.
And there were other key rulings.
Yes, like the 1876 decision United States v. Cruikshank. It severely limited the federal government's ability to prosecute individuals like KKK members for violating the civil rights of black citizens. It ruled the 14th Amendment only applied to state actions, not private conspiracies.
So violent groups were essentially let off the hook by the federal government.
It left black citizens at the mercy of hostile state authorities, who were often complicit. And then, of course, the infamous 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson decision.
Separate but equal.
Exactly. It enshrined separate but equal into law, providing the legal foundation for the entire Jim Crow system, explicitly sanctioning racial segregation and inequality for decades. The highest court legitimized the whole oppressive structure.
You can't talk about this era of impunity without talking about the Ku Klux Klan.
Absolutely not. Their role was pervasive and terrifying. And it's crucial to understand, the KKK wasn't some fringe group operating in the shadows, completely separate from mainstream society.
No.
No, the sources describe it explicitly as a paramilitary arm of the white supremacist power structure. Its ranks often included prominent citizens, doctors, lawyers, businessmen, local law enforcement officials, even elected politicians, deeply infiltrated into the fabric of society.
What was their main function?
Their primary role was terror. To terrorize black citizens into submission, suppress voting, crush any political organizing, dismantle economic progress, and they did this through brutal tactics, public lynchings, savage beatings, widespread arson, all designed to enforce the racial hierarchy through sheer, overwhelming fear.
And they operated with impunity.
Largely, yes. We saw in Rosewood, Klan members from a nearby rally actively joined the mob. In Wilmington, the Redshirts acted as the Democratic Party's violent enforcers during the coup. Their actions were rarely, if ever, prosecuted, showing how integrated they were, how protected they were by the official legal system. Estimated 25-minute mark.
If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Tales of Black.
So this relationship between the official legal system, the courts, the police, and the unofficial, extra-legal system of violence, the lynch mobs, the KKK, it wasn't antagonistic, it was symbiotic.
They reinforced each other.
Profoundly. The official system's failure to protect black citizens and prosecute white perpetrators effectively licensed and encouraged the violence of the unofficial system. It sent a message. You can do this, and nothing will happen.
And the violence of the unofficial system kept black people powerless within the official one.
Exactly. The terror wrought by mobs and the Klan ensured black citizens remained politically powerless. They couldn't safely vote, serve on juries, or challenge the biased official system through normal democratic means. It created this vicious, self-perpetuating cycle.
How did the cycle work?
Because the courts wouldn't punish them, mobs felt empowered to act with impunity. Because mobs terrorized black communities, black citizens couldn't gain the political power needed to change the courts. Impunity bred violence, and violence ensured continued impunity.
So the lack of accountability wasn't just an absence of justice.
It was an actively operating system. The state, through both action and calculated inaction, effectively deputized the enforcement of white supremacy to vigilante groups. And then the actions of those groups were retroactively legalized through official indifference, judicial rulings, and a refusal to prosecute.
So the system wasn't just designed for impunity, it actively produced it. What has been the enduring cost of that design? And what efforts, decades later, have been made to actually reckon with this devastating history?
The cost is immeasurable, really. The destruction of these communities left these incredibly deep, tangible wounds that absolutely persist today. They cast this long, dark shadow over generations.
It wasn't just a temporary setback.
Not at all. If we connect this to the bigger picture, The consequences weren't just the immediate devastation, though that was profound enough. The real impact was this generational compounding harm that continues to shape the racial disparities we see today in wealth, in opportunity, in health outcomes.
Let's talk about the economic devastation first. What happened right after?
Immediately after, thousands were left homeless, living in tents, in makeshift refugee camps, stripped of literally everything they owned. This wasn't just a temporary displacement. The reports call it the complete destruction of a prosperous Black community.
A total loss of wealth.
Catastrophic loss of generational wealth. Wealth that had been painstakingly built over decades. And research backs this up. Studies explicitly show that the Tulsa Massacre, for example, led to a significant, persistent decline in Black homeownership rates and occupational status in the decades that followed. The economic damage was deep and lasting.
And then there was the silence, the historical erasure.
The Great Silence, as it's often called. After these atrocities, there was a concerted, deliberate campaign of silence and cover-up that lasted for decades.
How did that work?
News reports were actively suppressed. The events were systematically removed from local history books, from state curricula, from the national narrative, effectively wiped from public memory.
And the survivors?
They often remained silent for decades, out of justifiable fear of reprisal, out of deep trauma, and because of the societal denial all around them. It made it incredibly difficult for the truth to even surface, let alone be acknowledged.
And this historical destruction, you're saying, it connects directly to disparities today.
The links are undeniable. Look at Tulsa now. Black residents are still twice as likely to be unemployed compared to white residents. They face a staggering 35% poverty rate. These statistics have direct roots in the destruction of Greenwood and the subsequent barriers to recovery.
And other policies made it worse.
Absolutely. The initial damage was compounded by decades of discriminatory policies, things like redlining, where federal agencies literally drew red lines around Black neighborhoods on maps, designating them as high risk.
Making it impossible to get loans.
Denying residents access to mortgages, insurance, business loans. It suffocated investment and wealth building for generations. Then came urban renewal projects in the mid-20th century.
Sometimes called Negro removal.
Cynically, yes. Because these projects often involved building highways or public housing projects right through the heart of surviving Black communities, displacing residents again, destroying businesses, fracturing social ties. In Greenwood's case, a major interstate highway was literally built right through what remained of Black Wall Street. A final physical obliteration. Recovery was made almost impossible.
But the silence wasn't total. People started fighting back, trying to get the truth out.
Thankfully, yes. The fight for truth and recognition was incredibly long, arduous, spanning generations. But efforts to break that silence finally gained momentum in the latter half of the 20th century.
Who led that fight?
Courageous journalists were key, like the St. Petersburg Times with their groundbreaking 1982 investigative series on Rosewood, which brought that forgotten story back into the light. And critically, the tenacious survivors themselves and their descendants, who refused to let these stories die.
And this pressure led to official action.
Eventually, yes. It led to the establishment of official state commissions to investigate these events. The Oklahoma Commission for Tulsa, authorized in 1996, 75 years later, its 2001 report was huge.
What did it find?
It officially acknowledged the complicity of city and state officials. It confirmed the scale of destruction, estimating 100 to 300 deaths. And significantly, it explicitly recommended direct reparations for survivors and descendants.
What about Rosewood and Wilmington?
Similar commissions. Florida's Rosewood investigation, mandated by the legislature, produced its report in 1993. It meticulously documented the massacre and the failure of law enforcement, paving the way for compensation. And the Wilmington 1898 Commission in North Carolina, established in 2000, formally recognized the event as a white supremacist coup and detailed the immense damage. These commissions were crucial steps in getting official acknowledgement.
But acknowledgement is one thing. Reparations, actual repair, seems to have followed very different paths.
Starkly different paths, highlighting these deep fissures in how America confronts its past. Rosewood achieved something remarkable, truly historic, with legislative success in 1994.
Florida House Bill 591.
Exactly. The first time in U.S. history, a legislative body provided direct compensation to Black individuals for racial violence. They allocated $2.1 million, $150,000 each of the 9 verified survivors still living, plus a scholarship fund for descendants.
How did they justify that legally?
The argument wasn't based on proving individual guilt after so long. It was built on a state's undeniable failure to protect its citizens. framed powerfully as a moral obligation to repair the harm.
But Tulsa was different. The commission recommended reparations.
Recommended them, yes. But the Oklahoma legislature tragically never implemented that recommendation. Direct reparations were never paid.
And lawsuits failed.
Repeatedly. Lawsuits filed by the dwindling number of elderly survivors were dismissed again and again, right up to the Oklahoma Supreme Court in June 2024. The courts cited rigid legal doctrines like statutes of limitations.
Basically saying it was too late to sue.
Effectively, yes. And arguing, incredibly, that the clear lingering effects of the massacre weren't the responsibility of the current defendants, denying a legal path to redress.
But there was a recent development in Tulsa, a private trust.
Yes. In June 2025, the mayor announced a $105 million private trust for descendants. It's called a Path to Repair. But notably, it deliberately avoids direct cash payments to individuals and explicitly sidesteps the term reparations, signaling a very different, perhaps more limited approach. Estimated 30-minute mark.
If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Tales of Black. Beyond financial redress, commemoration itself is also a powerful form of reconciliation, right? Making sure these stories aren't forgotten.
Absolutely vital. Ensuring future generations understand this painful history. And we see modern efforts to do this through both physical memorials and cultural institutions.
Like in Tulsa.
In Tulsa, you now have the state-of-the-art Greenwood Rising History Center. There's the serene John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park, and numerous historical markers placed by dedicated groups like the Tulsa Community Remembrance Coalition, all working to preserve and teach the story of Black Wall Street.
And elsewhere, Rosewood, Slocum, East St. Louis.
For Rosewood, the Real Rosewood Foundation continues its tireless work preserving the memory, and there are plans for a Rosewood Museum near Gainesville. In Slocum, Texas, after decades of effort and local resistance, a historical marker for the massacre was finally dedicated in 2016.
Acknowledging the brutality.
And finally. And in East St. Louis, a Centennial Commemoration Committee created sacred sites and historical markers. These efforts ensure the history isn't erased, and hopefully the lessons can actually be learned.
So these contrasting outcomes, Rosewood's legislative success versus Tulsa's legal failures on reparations, they really highlight a fundamental issue.
They really do. A fundamental dichotomy, maybe that architectural flaw we mentioned, in the U.S. system's ability to remedy historical injustice. Legislatures, though it's rare, can act on a moral obligation, as Florida did. It shows a pathway rooted in political will, societal pressure.
But the courts are different.
The judiciary often finds itself constrained by rigid legal doctrines like statutes of limitations that were simply not designed to address claims of deep generational harm stemming from state-sanctioned violence and historical erasure. The very erasure made timely lawsuits impossible for victims.
So for these kinds of historical state-sponsored atrocities, the path to financial compensation might lie more in politics.
It strongly suggests that, yes, the path may lie more squarely in the political and legislative arenas, where moral principles and a societal consensus can actually drive action, rather than relying solely on the judicial sphere, which seems bound by legal doctrines that often prevent true justice for these kinds of historical wrongs.
So wrapping this all up, what does this history mean for us today, decades, even a century later?
Well, this raises, I think, an important and urgent question for our society right now. The struggle for justice, for repair, for Greenwood, Rosewood, and all the other communities it destroyed. It isn't just about correcting dusty historical records.
No, it feels much more alive than that.
It's a vital, ongoing battle. It's about compelling America to finally confront the foundational injustices that profoundly shaped its past and continue, undeniably, to shape its present.
So, to summarize the key findings.
In essence, no individual, no organization was ever held criminally or financially responsible for the systematic destruction of these vibrant Black communities. And crucially, this wasn't just an oversight. It wasn't a few bad apples or a failure of process.
It was the system working as intended.
It was the direct, deliberate outcome of a society and its core institutions. Police, courts, even the Supreme Court being intentionally constructed and operated to maintain white supremacy. The horrific violence was the physical manifestation of that ideology, and the widespread impunity was its legal and political guarantee.
And the legacy is still with us.
Very much alive, measurable today. You see it in the persistent racial wealth gap. You see it in ongoing health disparities, educational inequalities, and you hear it in the passionate, necessary, and ongoing debates about reparations and what true justice, true repair actually looks like after such profound historical harm.
So it becomes clear. These efforts we see today, to commemorate, to seek redress, they aren't just about fixing a historical error. They're not just about filling in a forgotten chapter in a textbook.
No, not at all.
They represent a profound living struggle for the very soul of the nation, a demand that America grapple honestly, fully, with the injustices that define so much of its past and continue, whether we acknowledge it or not, to influence our present.
Well said.
Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you, the listener, to consider. If justice for these historical atrocities remains so elusive, so difficult to achieve through our traditional legal means, what other pathways might truly reconcile this nation with its foundational injustices? And maybe more personally, what responsibility do we have as current generations in truly understanding this history and in actively addressing the long, undeniable shadow it still casts today?
A crucial question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this exploration has given you some new insights, maybe a new perspective on a critical, often overlooked, but immensely impactful part of American history.
If this touched something in you, subscribe, comment, and share it forward. You're not just watching, you're part of this legacy. This story isn't over. Subscribe to carry it forward.